The town of Ravenshade was surrounded by dense, ancient forests, but none were more feared than the silent grove. No birds sang there, no animals scurried through the underbrush. The trees stood unnaturally still, their twisted limbs reaching skyward like the frozen hands of the dead. It was a place of whispered legends and forgotten souls, a place where the boundary between the living and the lost had worn thin. Daniel Grayson was an investigative journalist, a skeptic by nature, determined to debunk the myths surrounding the Silent Grove. He had spent years exposing fraudulent ghost stories and unraveling urban legends. When he heard about the disappearances near the forest, hikers vanishing without a trace, search parties finding only their footprints abruptly ending, he knew he had to see it for himself. Armed with a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, Daniel set out at dusk. The sky was bruised with purples and deep oranges as he approached the forest's edge. An unnatural hush settled around him the moment he stepped past the first tree. Even the wind seemed reluctant to enter. The deeper he walked, the heavier the air became, thick with an unshakable pressure. The ground was soft beneath his boots, damp with an eerie cold that seeped into his bones. He snapped photos of the towering trees, their bark marked with strange, jagged carvings. They weren't letters, nor any symbols he recognized. He checked his compass. The needle spun wildly before stopping, pointing deeper into the woods. His phone had no signal. His flashlight flickered despite fresh batteries. Still, he pressed on. Then, the whispers began. At first, they were indistinct, like wind rushing through hollow spaces. But as he moved forward, they grew clearer, his name spoken in a chorus of voices, both young and old, male and female. Daniel froze. "Who's there?" The voices did not respond. Instead, the trees around him shifted, not swaying, not bending in the wind, shifting. Their positions were changing. Paths that had been open were now blocked. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling at the edges like fingers reaching for him. Panic clawed at his chest. He turned, retracing his steps, only to find that the path behind him was gone. His breathing grew ragged. He had marked his route with small ribbons tied to branches, but they had vanished. The forest was swallowing him whole. Then he saw it, a clearing bathed in cold silver light. In the center stood an ancient oak, taller than any tree he had ever seen, its bark blackened as though burned. And beneath it stood them, dozens of figures. They were neither fully human nor entirely shadow. Their forms wavered, flickering between flesh and mist. Their faces were gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouths stretched in silent screams. Some he recognized, faces from missing person reports. Others were impossibly old, dressed in clothing centuries out of date. Daniel stepped back. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. One figure broke away from the group, a woman in a tattered white dress, her feet hovering inches above the ground. Her hollow eyes fixed on him. "You should not be here," she whispered. Daniel tried to move, to run, but his legs refused to obey. The air around him thickened, pressing against his skin, pulling him downward. The woman raised a hand, and the ground beneath him softened. His feet sank. He struggled, twisting, clawing at the dirt, but the forest had him now. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the woman's solemn expression. By morning, the silent grove had returned to its undisturbed stillness. No trace of Daniel remained, except for his notebook, lying open at the forest's edge, filled with frantic, unfinished sentences. The last words scrawled upon the page read, "They are waiting."